Hello everyone, welcome back to Pro Tour Magic Origins. Rich Hagan alongside the Pro Tour historian Brian David Marshall, and at BDM yesterday we went through a draft and a draft viewer and got all the goodies in the world of Limited, and today we get to do it all again. Before we get into our 5 color pairs, what is starting to become clear to you in the world of Magic Origins draft?
I think also last weekend we had Grand Prix Dallas, Fort Worth, which was also limited in this format. Combat tricks, as the new removal spell. Talking to players on the floor, a card like Gearport Gearcrafter was, a lot of people had that as their top red common, or, in the creature spot. Not obviously Fiery Impulse is number one, but both the Crow and Sergeant and Bogart Brute have kind of moved ahead of that in people's pick orders just because of how difficult those creatures are to deal with on the board.
First Strike and Menace, respectively.
Yes, yeah. And then, again, Menace, playing with a card like Enshrouding Mists, you attack with your 3/2 Bogart Brutes, they put 2, okay, I gotta kill it, put 2 guys in, and then you get the opportunity to 2-for-1 them with an Enshrouding Mist. So the other thing that's been interesting to see is the reaction to how different teams have valued green. We heard a lot of players talking about green as the worst color, and predictably, there's other people who are like, what are you talking about? Green is the best color. So it's been really interesting to see that sort of strife among some top drafters.
Isn't there always a sense, and perhaps it's clearer in core sets than it is perhaps more under the hood in some of the more complicated and moving part sets, that the best color is always the worst color.
It's always my favorite color.
Right? I mean, the worst color is always the best color. It's just working out what at the table the definition of the worst color is,
but
right?
Anecdotally, we did hear that there were players, playtest teams that said, look, we have drafts where there was one green player and they got all the green cards, and they went 1 and 2. So I mean that was the story coming in from a lot of anecdotal evidence, but we're seeing other people who are first picking Wild Instincts and taking green cards and really feel comfortable with it. So it's kind of interesting to me to watch just the different valuations from the different teams.
Also, you want to put a little asterisk on that 1 and 2 draft, because that's a 1 and 2 draft where your 7 possible opponents begin with 250 lifetime pro points and 3 Pro Tour top 8s, which is not, unless you're in Las Vegas, your local Friday Night Magic, by and large.
Right.
And so the window at this level, you want every room to outplay someone, and generally tapping out for 6 or 7 mana to make a 6/6 green creature with Renown 6 or whatever it happens to be, that isn't...
It only costs 5.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's not necessarily outplaying people in a way that all those tricks you talked about kind of are. The 2-for-1 that comes from the big dumb green guy is... it's huge and you are little. Smash.
It's very straightforward. They're just like, I just have to put 2 guys in front of it.
Right, indeed. So certainly something to watch out for as we go through the color pairs. Now, yesterday, you can check this out on YouTube. We went through the 4 white color pairings, and we also dabbled with a bit of blue-black graveyard action. So let's get to our 5 for today, and we begin with blue-red artifacts. So why don't we take a look at that, and BDM, what is the overall sense of what blue-red artifacts is trying to do?
This is we see people doing it in Constructed too. It's all about making Thopter tokens, right? It's about getting these card advantageous creatures like Thopter Engineer and Gearport Gearcrafter, and if Helios shines upon you, his benevolence, you get a Whirler Rogue, cards where you're just, putting out, 2-for-1, 3-for-1 just on the board, and then taking advantage of that with cards like Thopter Spy Network or, a Chief of the Foundry or something along those lines.
So why don't we look at the top 5 commons as being picked by you on Magic Online, the 1st through 5th picked commons amongst draft winners. So these are getting the job done, BDM.
Yeah, so on Kaladesh, the gear crafters are very popular. This is, again, very familiar to people who are just coming out of our last draft format, where they made, Sandstep Outcast is a card that's going to be very familiar. Puts a 1/1 flyer into play. It leaves a 2/1 body in play. You don't have the option of putting a +1/+1 counter on your gear crafter, but let's be honest. that was rarely, that mode was rarely ever engaged on the Outcast. So this is a card that gives you a threat in the air, gives you a body to trade on the ground, and it's just a solid foundation for also all the Artifact Matters cards that come later on in your packs.
Does this tie in with what you were talking about with this idea of here are all the tricks that are 2 for 1, but it turns out that if the 2 is a Girapur Gearcrafter and a 1/1 Thopter that came with it, it negates the 2 for 1.
Well, you're getting your 2 for 1 right there on the board, right? You're getting a creature that's going to fly. It might get in there for 4 or 5 damage. It might force your opponent to engage with it, where you get to use another combat trick on it. They block with a spider. You Titan Strength it. That's pretty sweet. You have a 2/1 then on the ground that you're able to trade with their cleric of the forward order or whatever.
Sure.
So it's just really nice. It lets you engage on 2 fronts.
All right, let's take a look at the uncommons then. What are you picking at home in your Magic Online winning drafts? Whirler Rogue, Thopter Engineer, Jessian Thief, Reclusive Artificer, and Ravaging Blaze.
To me, that list should be Whirler Rogue, Whirler Rogue, Whirler Rogue, and then 2 Thopter tokens.
Right.
I mean, that's the card you most want to open in draft. You know what I mean? Like, that's the card you're really thinking about. You don't want to, it's hard to expect a rare to be there, but there's a really good chance that this uncommon Whirler Rogue's going to be there, and that's going to be the card you're most often going to first pick. And it's one of the problems, actually, to me, with the blue-red artifact deck, is that, it's not like the Whirler Rogue has the same casting cost as, say, Reclusive Artificer, which limits it to that red-blue lane, right? Because it's blue, the blue-white Flyers deck can play it, the blue-green Tempo deck can play it. Like, oh, I'm going to make my giant green fatty unblockable, and I'm going to attack. You don't get past these. You need to open that. Same thing with Thopter Engineer, and the same thing with Girapur Gearcrafter, right? Those cards don't kind of like wind their way around the table to you very late. So you don't get to, you don't get to be pushed into the artifact deck. You got to really kind of open some of the cards there, like a Whirler Rogue.
Speaking of Whirler Rogue, I know that you do a lot of drafting, and therefore you will have played a lot with and against that card, but in a limited environment. Did you take a moment in the past couple of weeks to think about Whirler Rogue in Standard? Did you see that coming?
No, I didn't see the blue-red artifacts decks coming. I mean, it makes some sense. We've seen cards like, I guess the comparison is Siege Gang Commander. I certainly thought about Pia and Kieran Nalaar getting played, and then maybe it's sort of this sort of uncommon common blindness that you can have sometimes.
Sure.
You're like, oh, what are the rares? What do they do?
And also because Whirler Rogue is such a good limited card, you just routinely go
identify it as limited.
Rogue, bang, feel good about yourself, and okay.
Reclusive Artificer, by the way, that's a card that for me has really underperformed in this archetype. Again, same thing. It's just like a lot of times you're just trading cards, and it's hard to get a good, mix of artifacts going.
Okay, our next color pair is green and blue, and this is about tempo on Ravnica.
Yeah, this is what you're almost always trying to do in green and blue. It's like, I'm going to play some fat creatures, and then I'm going to bounce things. I'm going to, play giant growths. I'm going to, figure out some way to fly over you all of a sudden. So, it's kind of a classic thing. If you open up a Mana Gorge or Hydra, whatever color pair you're in, it's going to make that deck a lot better.
Okay, let's look at the top 5 commons as picked by you in Magic Online wins. Separatist Void Mage Bounce, Claustrophobia Removal, Leaf Gilder Acceleration, Wild Instincts Removal, and Rocks Maulers, the big 4/4.
I'm really surprised to not see Disperse on this list, honestly. I love Disperse in like, where you're just putting this kind of like big threats on the ground, and you get your Rocks Mauler in there, and you're attacking, and they put 2 creatures in front of it because they don't want it to get renowned to a 6/6 trampler, and you get to bounce one, you get to trample over the other, you get to still get your renown trigger.
Yeah, and it ought to be good in a format where creatures are getting renowned and where there are token creatures running around that when they're dispersed, they go away forever. I agree, that's a very good point. Let's move on to the uncommons then. Top 5 uncommons as picked by you in the tempo.
Look, Whirler Rogue.
Yeah. Also, Bounding Crazes, which card I like a lot, Sky Snare, Spider, Undercity Troll, and the 2/2 fly for 4 Tower Geist.
Right, again, talk about your 2-for-1s. You play your Tower Geist, you get to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, one of them in your graveyard. Oh, by the way, sometimes that's really good. right? Sometimes that gives you spell mastery, or that gives you something to, you know, grow back from your graveyard with a, you know, a graveyard card. So, you know, excellent card.
You are well known as a Simic acolyte, adept. One of those, I think, is probably the right term for Simic.
Mad scientist.
That'll do fine. Is it? The mad scientist. But aren't you? How do you feel about blue-green in terms of your ability to draft it regularly and play with it? Is it fun blue-green for you?
So, unlike some other sets where blue-green is really pushed, like there's nothing super enticing that like you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get to do this, and you where you have that fantasy, I'm gonna get a reclusive artificer, I'm gonna kill their guy, I'm gonna get in with everybody. But that said, I really like the deck. Right, I really like what it does. I like ramping things with Leaf Gilder. I like bouncing things. I love the Void Mage Separatist. You know, it's a fun deck to play. It's just there's not as, you know, Bounding Krasis is not as compelling as some of the other, you know, as like a Thunderclap Wyvern in terms of like, I want to be this color pair.
But you do get still, if as a blue-green mage, you still get the blue-green fun out of Magic Origins.
I mean, you get, you know what it is? It feels to me, blue-green feels to me almost like the most fundamental limited. You're playing just like, you're like, I am going to play a really good creature on every turn, and then I'm going to bounce things or do things or counter things or draw cards or do something that, you know, just pushes me over the top of you.
Just to fill you in, by the way, time has been called on the main round. Still some results to come in, so you're missing no magic. The second they're ready, we'll be right back to it.
Yeah, just to give you, we're talking about card. I had a deck yesterday, blue-green, Nissa's Revelation at the very top of my curve. You know, gain 5, draw 5, scry 5. Well, you don't always get to do 5, but sometimes you do.
Yeah, especially when you're you. Yes. All right, let's move on. Next up, it's black and red. And actually, this is a pretty flavorful black-red mechanic. We're basically talking about sacrifice on the home plane of Regatha.
Regatha? That's fairly new for us. But yeah, we watched this deck get drafted yesterday by Yu Yu Watanabe. You know, we saw things like Nantuko Husk and, you know, all the threaten effects.
Enthralling Victor and
Active Treason, yeah. So this is a fun deck to draft.
Yeah, so you temporarily steal your opposing creatures, and then it's not that temporary because you sacrifice them and buy. Although that's been around pretty much since the beginning of the game, it still remains one of the filthiest normal things you can do in the game. Yeah,
Fiery Conclusion's a card that does a lot of work in this format, but you don't always feel great about it.
Right.
Unless you're doing it with your opponent's creature. Steal your creature, I'm going to attack you with it, and then I'm going to sacrifice it to kill your other creature.
Right, so let's move on then. What are the top 5 commons being picked in the black-red sacrifice archetype? Let's take a look at what you've been drafting in the Magic Online for the commons in black-red. So here we are, Fiery Impulse, Reeve Soul. You'd expect to see that, Lightning Javelin. So there are your 3 removal spells. You've got the Gear Crafter, which we've talked about, and there's Nantuko Husk because sacrifice outlet.
Right, and then, you know, we were talking about the Gear Crafter earlier being selected for other decks. In this deck, something like a Gear Crafter is great because it gives you 2 pieces of fodder, like a dragon fodder, for your Nantuko Husk. So it lets you, you know, you can play it and then you can sacrifice and you make your Husk, you know, as big as a 6/6 just off of that one creature.
Core sets are often a great place for newer players to learn. I think Nantuko Husk is a fantastic training card because there are so many awesome things you can do with it, and there are also so many things you have to think about on the other side of the table against it, and there is just enough room on the card that it doesn't just say, I am unbeatable. And there are ways to do very, like, disperse.
Yes.
Which we just talked about.
I've seen a lot of sad trombone moments with Nantuko Husk at FNM already, where someone's like, well, no blocks. They're like, okay, put a counter on my Hangerback Walker, sacrifice my Hangerback Walker, get 4 counters, sacrifice those 4 counters, you're dead.
Yes.
Oh, I should have blocked.
Excuse me one moment. Have you ever seen a happy trombone moment?
No.
I didn't think so. I thought they were always sad. Fine. So there we are. That's black-red. What else have we got in the black-red? What about the uncommons? What makes things really tick in the black-red sacrifice? Once again, gold you expect to see there with Blazing Hellhound. Ravaging Blaze once again is popular because it's an X spell. Cruel Revival, Enthralling Victor, well done Victor, and Fleshbag Marauder is back.
Right, so Active Treason, attack you. Oh, I don't want to block it because
because I'm getting it back.
I'm going to kill 2 of my creatures. Then you play Fleshbag Marauder after combat, sacrifice their creature. They sacrifice their own creature. 6 mana, lots of fun.
Yeah, and there's also that nice tension of traditionally, if you don't have the sacrifice outlets around, then it is quite straightforward. Act of Treason is, okay, you steal my guy, you hit me with it, I get it back, the game moves on, I was at 13, now I'm at 6.
Ideally, the game doesn't move on when you're playing Act of Treason that way.
From that point of view. But because of the sacrifice outlet, you are sometimes put in the position where you want to put your guy in front of your own guy. Because you think that it's going to get sacrificed and you're not getting it back anyway.
Right.
So there's a nice little game within a game there too. So that's Black-Red Sacrifice. As you can tell, we both like a lot of what's going on with that deck. There's a lot of play to it. Next up, we stay with black. We join it with green. It's time to talk black-green elves. On the home plane, pretty much my favorite place apart from Ravnica, I think, Lorwyn.
Yeah, the Black-Green Elves deck, this was really one of the first decks I think a lot of players gravitated to when they started drafting the format. You know, lots of really good card advantage cards. Elvish Visionary, Llanowar Empath, you know, the Shaman of the Pack, this really exciting uncommon that lets you finish a game. A card like Dwynen, which is like a crusade effect for your elves. So lots of exciting things to do in this archetype.
All right, why don't we look at the top 5 commons coming your way. We've got Leaf Gilder for mana ramp. You've got Elvish Visionary you see on the right there. Unholy Hunger, that one interests me. We'll come back to that, but also Reef Soul and Wild Instincts. Unholy Hunger, 5 feels like the number where I start getting nervous.
It is, and we've watched people, you know, we'll use Leaf Gilder as an example instead of Topin Freeblade, but the example's been Topin Freeblade a lot, where they're like, really, really good 2-drop, 5 mana removal spell. I'm going to take the 2-drop. We've seen that a lot. You know, it's a little expensive, but that said, it's also a get-out-of-jail-free card, right? It kills just about everything.
It kills Rock Maulers that are 6/6.
It kills 10/10 Mana Gorger Hydras. They briefly become 11/11, and then they die.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you got broken, go away.
Yes.
Mana Gorger Hydra, by the way, one of my absolute favorite cards in the set because it doesn't automatically win the game. It's a 1/1, and yet it's incredibly exciting. And if you can design cards that don't win the game and yet are incredibly exciting and eventually win the game, but not with inevitability, you can spend 6-8 turns with that thing in play, defining the narrative of the game before you find or don't find your Unholy Hunger.
Sometimes it's like being roasted slowly over a fire. You're like, I know I have one card in my deck that can deal with this, and you're waiting, and it's just getting bigger and bigger, and it's like, oh, it's a 12/12 now. I'll attack.
Yeah. And then you block with your Fetid Imp.
Wow.
And that's what I mean. You see, again, there are answers for great cards like Mana Gorger Hydra, which doesn't stop it being a great card, which I love. All right, let's take a look at what we're going with our Black-Green Elves as we head into Uncommon Land. Shaman of the Pack, Dwynen's Elite. Oh, I'll have a free 1/1 elf while I'm here. Sky Snare Spider, Undercity Troll, and Cruel Revival once again.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think this deck is actually best suited sometimes for the Cruel Revival and Unholy Hunger because you have the mana acceleration from Leaf Gilder. So you can actually deploy those on turn 4. You can actually, you actually have a little more room to navigate with your removal spells, where a lot of decks don't have that ability to accelerate their mana.
Well, by my reckoning, we did 5 yesterday, we've done 4 today so far. That must mean it is time for red-green. Now, traditionally, this is the beatdown. Oh, look, it is again. Red-green beatdown on Zendikar, where I believe we may be returning quite soon.
Yes. Yeah, Battle for Zendikar coming up. We're going to have our Hall of Fame induction ceremony there.
Oh, awesome.
But in the meantime, we have Zendikar Incarnate to work with.
Yes.
In this format. I mean, this really cares about lands. We see something like Zendikar's Royal, cares about getting to a lot of mana for something like Gaia's Revenge, and cares about the number of lands you have in play for something like Zendikar Incarnate.
Right, why don't we take a look at the top 5 commons then? and see what people are using to get their wins on Magic Online right now. Wild Instincts we've seen, Leaf Gilder we've seen, Fiery Impulse we've seen, more removal, Lightning Javelin, and Girapur Gearcrafter. The fact that that is turning up in multiple archetypes really does show that the power of the second split off body is a really big thing in this format.
And Leaf Gilder really matters here almost more than it matters in Elves. Because Elves, a lot of your premium cards are 2 and 3 mana. Yes, you have the Sylvan Messenger and you have the Llanowar Empath at 4 that you'd like to play on turn 3.
Right.
But here you have cards like Zendikar Incarnate. You have Rock's Mauler. You have all these cards that you really want to deploy and you really want to take advantage and get out ahead. And try to compete with those decks that are really putting you under a really aggressive curve.
All right, so those are your commons. Why don't we take a look at the 5 uncommons that are most popular, 1st through 5th picked on Magic Online. So there we are, Zendikar Incarnate, Undercity Troll. We've seen plenty of Ravaging Blaze. You see Seismic Elemental. Now that's an interesting card.
It's a great card. A lot of times with this deck, you'll just kind of you're just trying to stabilize. Sometimes your opponent just beating you down really quickly with a Topin Freeblade. You suddenly are hiding behind like a Rock's Mauler that hasn't been able to attack, and then a Vastwood Gorger the next turn, and you're finally keeping them at bay, but you still need a way to win. And
yes.
Seismic Elemental will give you that way to win.
Fair enough. So we did blue-red, we did green-blue, black-red, black-green, and red-green. You can see the other 5 color pairs, all the white pairs, plus blue-black with Randy and myself from yesterday. That's up on YouTube. This will be too. And those were your Magic Online draft archetypes.